My father-in-law served me divorce papers at dinner. He forgot who had guaranteed his $2.3 million loan. All right, gather round, because I need to tell you guys about the worst dinner of my life. My father-in-law, a man who once looked me dead in the eye and sneered, "You were just keeping my daughter warm until the right man came along," actually handed me divorce papers right there at the table. What did I do? I signed them. But then I asked him one question that drained every last drop of color from his smug face. And honestly, looking back now, that night might also have been the absolute best one of my life. My name's Harrison, I'm 34, and up until about 3 months ago, I was married to a woman named Celeste Ashford. Well, Celeste Ashford Mercer, technically, though she'd already started dropping my last name from her social media about 6 months before any of this mess went down. I didn't even notice at first. My sister, Nora, did. She's observant like that. Always has been. Let me back up a bit. I grew up in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton, Ohio, with my mom and Nora. Dad left when I was 9, and Mom worked herself to the bone with 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. I scrapped and clawed my way to a partial scholarship at Ohio State, bussing tables to cover the rest, and eventually graduated with a degree in supply chain management. Not exactly glamorous, I know, but man, I turned out to be really good at logistics. By 28, I'd started my own consulting firm. Small, yeah, but profitable, helping mid-sized manufacturers actually get their stuff where it needed to go. By 30, I was pulling in solid money. Not rich, but comfortable. Self-made comfortable, which, trust me, is a completely different universe for what the Ashford family considers comfortable. I met Celeste at a fundraiser in Columbus when I was 26. She was finishing grad school, stunningly beautiful, sharp as a tack, and she actually laughed at my jokes. Honestly, at that point in my life, that was enough for me. We dated for a year, got engaged, got married, and for the first 4 years, things were genuinely good. We traveled, we talked about kids. We really built a life together. She supported my business. I supported her career in nonprofit management. It worked. We worked. Then her father retired. Victor Ashford. Ugh. He's the kind of man who shakes your hand while simultaneously scanning the room over your shoulder, just in case someone more important walks in. He spent 35 years in commercial real estate development, built a decent portfolio, and talked about it like he personally invented the concept of property. When he was working, he was too busy to micromanage his daughter's life. But once he retired, suddenly, he had nothing but time. It started small. Sunday dinners became mandatory. Then it was family vacation planning, always to places they picked. Then Victor started casually, subtly, insinuating that Celeste should reconsider certain things. My business, our neighborhood, the car I drove, the fact that we hadn't joined the country club. "It's not about money, Harrison," he told me once, swirling a glass of wine that probably cost more than my first car payment. "It's about positioning." I just smiled and said nothing, because I had learned early on that arguing with Victor was like arguing with a hurricane. You just waited for it to pass. Celeste's mom, Diane, was subtler, but somehow even more infuriating. She'd compliment me in ways that were actually cutting insults. "Harrison, it's so refreshing that you don't care about appearances." Or, "You must be so proud of your little company." She once told me I had bootstrap energy. I still don't know what that means, but I promise you it wasn't a compliment. For a while, Celeste pushed back. She'd tell her dad to knock it off. She'd roll her eyes at her. "Mom." But somewhere around year 5, something shifted. She started agreeing with them more. Small things at first. Maybe we should look at houses in a nicer area. Maybe I should consider taking on a partner, someone with connections. Maybe we should spend Christmas with her family this year instead of alternating. Then came Trent Calloway. Trent is the son of Gerald Calloway, Victor's former business partner. He's 30, works in finance, has the kind of jawline that looks like it was engineered in a lab, and says things like, "Let's circle back on that," in casual conversation. Victor started inviting him to family events about 18 months ago. Barbecues, holiday parties, even Celeste's birthday dinner. "He's like family," Victor would always say. "Gerald and I go way back." But here's what I noticed, what nobody expected me to notice. Trent was never seated next to Diane, never next to Victor. He was always next to Celeste. Every single time. I mentioned it to Nora during a phone call. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Harrison, you need to pay attention to what's happening here." I told her she was being paranoid. She told me I was being naive. Nora's usually right about these things, which, if you have a sister, you know is annoying. Over the next few months, the temperature in my marriage plummeted in ways I couldn't quite name. Celeste wasn't cruel. She wasn't exactly distant, either. But she started treating me like a roommate she was fond of rather than a husband she loved. Conversations got shorter. Plans got vaguer. She started going to her parents' house on weeknights without mentioning it until she was already there. And then came the dinner. Victor invited us to his favorite downtown restaurant, a steakhouse with plush leather booths and waiters who seemed to memorize your name before you even sat down. He said it was to celebrate family. Celeste seemed incredibly nervous the whole drive there. She kept adjusting her earrings, which she only does when she's anxious. When we arrived, Diane was already seated. She hugged Celeste for a beat too long. She hugged me the way you hug someone at a funeral. Quick, perfunctory, and with a sense of obligation. Victor stood up, buttoned his jacket, and shook my hand. Firm grip, intense eye contact. "Harrison," he said, "glad you could make it." We ordered. We made small talk. Victor asked about my business the way a doctor asks about a terminal patient. Lots of gentle nodding, no real interest. Diane talked about a garden party she was planning. Celeste just stared at her water glass, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the condensation. After the entrees were cleared, Victor wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it neatly beside his plate, and reached into his jacket. He pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table to me. "What's this?" I asked. My voice felt incredibly calm, almost attached. "It's time, Harrison," he said. His voice was calm, almost sickeningly warm. "You're a decent man, but Celeste deserves a certain kind of life. And frankly, you've taken her as far as you can. No hard feelings." I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. Already drafted. Celeste's signature was already on them. My stomach dropped, but my hands didn't tremble. I looked at my wife. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Victor leaned forward and said something I will never, ever forget as long as I live. "You were just keeping my daughter warm until the right man came along." The restaurant noise faded. The clink of glasses, the murmur of other conversations. It all just dropped away, like someone had hit a mute button on the world. Diane was watching me with this tight little smile, like she was observing a fascinating science experiment. Celeste had tears running down her cheeks, but she still wouldn't look at me. And here's the thing that might surprise you. I wasn't surprised. I should have been, right? A normal person would be utterly shocked, blindsided. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I've been quietly, subconsciously building this picture for months. Every ignored suggestion, every time. Trent showed up. Every time Celeste came home from her parents' house, a little more distant, a little less mine. So I did something none of them expected. I pulled out my pen, the one I always carry, and I signed the papers right there at the table. Victor blinked. That wasn't in his script. He'd expected begging. Maybe anger. Definitely some kind of negotiation. I slid the papers back across the table, capped my pen, and looked directly at Victor. "I just have one question," I said. He spread his hands magnanimously, like a king granting an audience. "Of course." I leaned forward slightly. "Victor, who exactly do you think is personally guaranteeing the $2.3 million construction loan on your Birchfield project?" The color left his face so fast it was almost medical. It was like watching a cartoon character turn gray in real time. "A couple of you have asked me about the Birchfield thing already, and trust me, I'll explain it. But first, let me finish telling you about that dinner, because Victor's face was only the beginning. When I asked that question, the entire table went still. Diane looked at Victor with this confused expression, like she was watching a play and someone had just skipped ahead 3 scenes. Celeste finally looked up at me, but not with guilt anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Victor recovered faster than I expected. He's a real estate guy. After all, he spent decades sitting across from people trying to knock him off balance. He straightened his tie, leaned back in his chair, and forced a smile. "Harrison, let's not mix business with personal matters." "You're right," I said. "Let's not." I stood up, left 3 20s on the table for my share of the meal, and walked out. No yelling, no dramatic speech. I just left. I sat in my car in the parking garage for probably 15 minutes before I started the engine. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My chest felt hollow. Yeah, but my hands were steady. I called Nora. "He did it," I said. "The dinner?" she asked. "Divorce papers already signed by Celeste." He slid them across the table like a contract. Nora was quiet for maybe 3 seconds. Then she said, "What did you do?" "I signed them." Another pause. "Good." That's the thing about Nora. She doesn't waste time on sympathy when there's a situation to manage. She asked if I had a lawyer. I told her I had a consultation scheduled for Monday. I'd set it up 2 weeks ago when I found Celeste's search history. She'd been looking up amicable divorce timeline and how to divide assets in Ohio for over a month. Yeah, I'd known this was coming. Not the exact dinner ambush, but the general trajectory. When your wife starts Googling divorce while you're asleep next to her, you don't need a detective to tell you where things are heading. Now, let me explain Birchfield. About 14 months ago, Victor came to me with what he called an investment opportunity. He was developing a mixed-use property on the east side of town. Retail on the ground floor, apartments above, the Birchfield project. His legacy build, he called it. The problem was Victor's own assets were leveraged to the gills. He had equity on paper, but his cash flow was a mess, and his credit profile was stretched thin from 2 other projects that hadn't fully paid out yet. He needed someone with clean credit and liquid reserves to co-sign the construction loan, $2.3 million. Now, before you all start yelling at your screens, yes, I know co-signing a loan for your father-in-law is objectively a terrible idea. My accountant, Greg, told me that in almost those exact words. But here's the context. At the time, my marriage was struggling, but it wasn't dead yet. Celeste asked me to do it as a personal favor. She said it would mean the world to her father, that it would finally earn his respect. And I thought, maybe naively, that if I did this one thing, Victor might stop treating me like a temporary placeholder in his daughter's life. So I signed my name, my guarantee, my credit on the line. Victor shook my hand that day, too. Firm grip. Eye contact. "You're part of the family now, Harrison." 13 months later, he handed me divorce papers at a steakhouse and told me I was just keeping his daughter warm. Let that sink in. Here's what Victor either didn't think about or assumed wouldn't matter. A personal guarantee on a construction loan isn't just a signature. It's a legally binding commitment. If the borrower defaults, the guarantor is on the hook. But here's the flip side. The guarantor also has rights. I could petition to have my guarantee reviewed, modified, or even withdrawn under certain conditions, especially if there was material change in my personal circumstances, like, say, a divorce. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, I drove home to a dark house. Celeste wasn't there. I packed a bag, texted Nora that I'd be at her place for a few days, and left. The next morning, Celeste texted me. Not a call. A text. "Harrison, I'm sorry about how that happened. Dad shouldn't have done it that way. Can we talk?" I responded, "We can talk through attorneys." She didn't reply for 6 hours. Then, "You don't have to make this ugly." I didn't respond to that one. Over the next week, I started piecing together things I'd been too trusting to examine before. Celeste's girls' nights, that always seemed to end at restaurants where her parents also happened to be dining. The weekend she went to visit a college friend in Cincinnati, except when I checked our shared credit card. The charges were all from restaurants in Columbus, 10 minutes from Trent Calloway's apartment. I'm not going to say I went through her phone, but I will say that when your wife leaves her iPad logged into the same iCloud account, and you accidentally see a notification pop up from someone saved as T with a blue heart emoji, you start putting things together. The messages weren't explicitly romantic. Not yet, from what I could see. but they were intimate in a way that goes far beyond friendship. Late-night texts about feelings, inside jokes, Trent telling Celeste she deserved someone who matched her world. Celeste responding with things like, I know, I'm working on it. Working on it. That's what I was. Something she was working on resolving. I called Greg, my accountant, and told him to pull together everything related to the Birchfield guarantee. Every document I'd signed, every term sheet, every communication. Then I called the attorney I'd found, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who specialized in complex divorce cases involving shared business interests. Patricia listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said, So, your father-in-law handed you divorce papers while you're personally guaranteeing a construction loan? Yes, I confirmed, and he didn't address the guarantee in the divorce filing. It's not mentioned anywhere in the papers. She actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh. More like the laugh of someone who's seen a lot of stupidity in family court and just encountered a new personal best. Harrison, she said, I think your father-in-law just made a very expensive mistake. What I didn't know yet, and what I'd find out over the next 2 weeks, was exactly how expensive, because the Birchfield project wasn't just behind schedule. It was hemorrhaging money, and Victor had been hiding that from everyone, including the bank. But I'll get to that. First, I need to tell you about the phone call I got from Diane 3 days later, because it was one of the most unhinged conversations I've ever had in my life. So, Diane called me on a Wednesday morning at 7:15 a.m. I was at Nora's place, drinking coffee and reviewing the documents Greg had pulled together. When I saw the caller ID, I almost didn't answer, but Patricia had told me to document everything. So, I put on speaker and let Nora listen. Harrison, dear, Diane started, and I swear she used the same voice she uses when talking to the landscaper about trimming the hedges. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the other night. Which part? I asked. Well, all of it really. Victor can be direct, but his heart is in the right place. He just wants what's best for Celeste. Diane, I said, cutting her off. He handed me divorce papers at a restaurant and told me I was keeping your daughter warm for another man. He didn't mean it like that. How else could he possibly mean it? There was a pause. I could hear her recalibrating. Diane doesn't do well when people don't accept her initial framing of events. Harrison, we've always liked you. You know that. But you have to understand, the Calwas are old friends, and Trent has always had a special connection with Celeste. Some things are just meant to be. So, Victor didn't mean it like that. Another pause. Longer this time. What I'm calling about, she continued, her voice getting tighter, is this business about the Birchfield loan. Victor is very upset. He feels like you're threatening him. I haven't threatened anyone, Diane. I asked a question. Well, he'd like to discuss it. Man to man. He thinks you two can work something out. He can discuss it with my attorney. Her name is Patricia Okafor. I'll text you her number. The phone went dead. She just hung up. Nora looked at me over her coffee mug. That went well. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something that felt entirely counterintuitive. I went quiet. No angry emails, no social media posts, no calls to mutual friends. I went to work, came home to Nora's guest room, and let Patricia and Greg do their jobs. And here's what they found. The Birchfield project was originally budgeted at $3.1 million. Victor had secured $2.3 million through construction loan, which I guaranteed, and was supposed to fund the remaining $800,000 from his own reserves. Except he hadn't. According to the draw schedule Greg obtained from the bank, Victor had already pulled $1.9 million of the loan, but the project was only about 40% complete. The foundation and framing were done, but electrical, plumbing, and finishing were way behind schedule. Subcontractors were already complaining about slow payments. 2 of them had even filed preliminary lien notices. And Victor's $800,000 contribution, from what Greg could determine, only about $200,000 had actually gone into the project. The rest was either tied up as other properties or had been redirected somewhere Greg couldn't trace. In simple terms, Victor was building a $3.1 million project with mostly my credit, and he was running out of money before the building was even half done. Patricia laid it out for me plainly. As the guarantor, you have legitimate reasons to be concerned about this loan. If Victor defaults, the bank comes after you. You have every right to request a review of your guarantee, especially given the change in your personal circumstances. You mean the divorce? I asked. I mean the divorce that your father-in-law initiated while you were guaranteeing his loan. Yes. So, here's what we did. Patricia drafted a formal letter to the bank's commercial lending department, notifying them of a material change in the guarantor's circumstances, namely, my pending divorce from the borrower's daughter, and requesting a review of the guarantee terms. She also requested a current status report on the loan, including draw history and project completion percentage. This wasn't a threat. It was just a question. But in commercial lending, questions from guarantors are taken very seriously. While that was in motion, I took stock of the divorce itself. The papers Victor had given me were drafted by the Ashford family attorney, a guy named Leland who'd handled their affairs for 20 years. The proposed terms were, frankly, insulting. Celeste would keep the house, which was in both our names. I'd keep my business, but I'd owe Celeste a transitional support payment of $3,000 a month for 2 years. The Birchfield guarantee was not mentioned. My financial contribution to the down payment on the house was not mentioned. The $40,000 I'd lent Victor 18 months before the guarantee, which he'd never repaid, was not mentioned. Patricia drafted a counterproposal that addressed all of these issues. She's very thorough. Meanwhile, something interesting happened. Victor started being nice to me. He called on a Saturday afternoon, and his voice was completely different from the steakhouse. Warm, almost nostalgic. Harrison, listen. I think we got off on the wrong foot the other night. I've been doing some thinking, and maybe I was too hasty. Why don't you come by the house this weekend? We can talk this through like adults. I appreciate the call, Victor, I said, but any discussions about the divorce or the Birchfield project should go through our attorneys. Attorneys just complicate things. This is family. It was family, I replied. You changed that. He was quiet for a moment, then very carefully. The Birchfield situation doesn't need to be part of the divorce discussion. Those are separate matters. My attorney disagrees. Harrison, come on. I gave you that opportunity as a favor. You should be thanking me. I actually had set the phone down for a second after that one. The man who told me I was a placeholder in his daughter's life was now telling me I should be grateful he let me put my financial future on the line for his building project. Good night, Victor, I said, and hung up. That same week, Celeste showed up at my office. She didn't call ahead. She just walked in during lunch, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Harrison, please, can we just talk? Without lawyers, without my parents, just us. I looked at her standing in my doorway, and for a second, I saw the woman I'd married, the one who laughed at my jokes and believed in my business when it was just an idea on a napkin. But then I remembered, I'm working on it. What do you want to talk about, Celeste? About us? About maybe slowing this down. Dad went too far. You signed the papers before he gave them to me. She flinched. He asked me to. He said it would make the conversation easier. And you just did what he asked? She didn't answer. She stood there for a long time, then said, Trent means nothing to me. Harrison, Dad pushed that. It wasn't my idea. But you didn't stop it. She left after that. I watched her walk to her car through my office window. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before she pulled away. I felt bad. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. 7 years is 7 years. But feeling bad and changing course are two very different things. 2 days later, Patricia called me with an update. The bank had received her letter and was conducting an internal review of the Birchfield loan. They'd requested updated financial statements from Victor, which he had not yet provided. What happens if he doesn't provide them? I asked. Then the bank gets nervous, Patricia said. And when banks get nervous about construction loans, they do one thing. What's that? They freeze the draws. At that point, Victor still thought he could charm his way through this. He still thought I was the quiet, accommodating son-in-law who'd sign whatever was put in front of him. He was telling Diane it would all blow over. He was telling Celeste that I was just being dramatic. He had no idea what was coming. A lot of you have been asking about Trent through all of this. Fair question. Where was the supposed upgrade while everything was falling apart? The answer is he was doing exactly what Trent Calloway does best. Absolutely nothing useful. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, a guy named Derek who works in commercial lending and knows both families, that Trent had been telling people at his firm about his future father-in-law's real estate portfolio like it was already his to manage. He'd apparently even pitched Gerald, his own father, on the idea of the Calloway family investing in Victor's projects as a way to merge the two families' interests. Gerald Calloway said no, quickly and firmly. See, Gerald actually understands real estate finance. He'd looked at Victor's portfolio and seen what Greg had seen. Over-leveraged, cash poor, and propped up by other people's credit. Gerald had been Victor's partner years ago, and there was a reason they weren't partners anymore. Trent, of course, didn't tell Victor any of this. He just kept showing up to dinners, kept texting Celeste, and kept acting like the coronation was inevitable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the week everything started to crack. It was a Tuesday. I was at my office, reviewing a new client proposal, when Greg called. "The bank finished their review," he said. "It's not good for Victor." Here's what had happened. When Patricia sent her letter to the bank flagging the change in my circumstances, it triggered exactly what you'd expect from a cautious lender. They pulled the file. They looked at the draw history. They compared it to the project completion reports. And what they found was a gap, a significant one. Victor had drawn $1.9 million against a $2.3 million loan for a project that was 40% complete. In construction lending, draws are supposed to roughly track completion. You don't pull 75% of the money when the building is less than half done. It raises questions about where the funds went. The bank asked Victor for updated financial statements, a revised project timeline, and documentation of his $800,000 equity contribution. Victor had provided the timeline, but not the financials. He told them the statements were being prepared. They gave him 14 days. I didn't do anything. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call the bank. I didn't lobby anyone. I didn't make threats. I simply exercised my right as a guarantor to flag a change in circumstances. Everything that followed was the bank doing its job. While the clock was ticking, Victor made one more attempt. He didn't call me this time. He sent Celeste. She showed up at Nora's apartment on a Thursday evening. Nora answered the door, and for what she told me later, Celeste looked like she'd been crying for about 3 days straight. "I need to talk to Harrison," Celeste said. Nora, to her credit, let her in. I came out of the guest room, and we sat at Nora's kitchen table. Nora stayed in the living room, but didn't close the door. She's protective like that. "Harrison," Celeste said, and her voice cracked on my name. "Dad is in trouble." "I know. He says the bank is going to freeze the loan because of something you did." I notified the bank that my personal circumstances changed. Because they did. Because your father divorced me from you at a steakhouse. He's going to lose the project. Everything he's put into it. Everything I put into it. I countered. "You mean my guarantee? My credit? My risk?" She stared at the table. "Can you just call them? Tell them everything's fine." "Everything's not fine, Celeste. I'm getting divorced. The guy who orchestrated my divorce is using my financial backing to build his legacy project. And nobody thought to mention any of this to the bank. Does that sound fine to you?" She started crying again. I'm not proud of this, but I didn't comfort her. A month ago, I would have. But a month ago, she hadn't signed divorce papers behind my back and let her father humiliate me in public. "Your dad had 14 months to refinance me off that loan," I said. "He had 14 months to find another guarantor. He didn't, because he assumed I'd always be there. He assumed I'd just take whatever he dished out and keep my name on his loan, because that's what I've always done. He was wrong." "What's going to happen?" she whispered. "I honestly don't know. That's between your dad and the bank." She left. Nora handed me a glass of whiskey and said, "You did the right thing." The 14 days expired on a Friday. Victor had still not provided complete financial statements. On the following Monday, the bank froze all remaining draws on the Birchfield construction loan, pending a full review. Let me tell you what a draw freeze means on a construction project. It means the money stops. The subcontractors who are already complaining about slow payments now get no payments. The material suppliers stop delivering. The project timeline, already behind, comes to a complete halt, and every day it sits idle, it costs money in carrying charges, permits, and interest. Victor called me 17 times that Monday. I didn't answer. He left 3 voicemails. The first one was calm, almost conciliatory. "Harrison, this has gone far enough. Let's sit down and work this out." The second one was tighter. "You're being vindictive, and it's beneath you. Call me back." The third one dropped the pretense entirely. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This project is my life's work. You're going to destroy it because your feelings got hurt. Call me back now." I forwarded all 3 to Patricia. The next day, something happened that I genuinely didn't expect. Gerald Calloway called me. Not Trent. Gerald, the father, the former partner. "Harrison, I know we've never spoken directly," he said, "but I think you and I should have a conversation." "About what?" "About my son. And about Victor. I think there are things you should know." I met Gerald for coffee the following morning. He's a different breed than Victor. Quieter, more precise. He sat down, ordered a black coffee, and got right to it. "I ended my partnership with Victor 12 years ago because he has a habit of using other people's money to fund his ambitions and then acting like he did him a favor," Gerald said. "When I heard he'd gotten you to guarantee the Birchfield loan, I told Trent to stay away from the whole situation. He didn't listen. Why are you telling me this?" "Because my son is an idiot, but he's not malicious. Victor put this entire thing together. The divorce, the replacement husband, all of it. He sold Trent on the idea that he'd be marrying into a real estate dynasty. Trent bought it, because Trent buys everything that comes in nice packaging. And Celeste..." Gerald paused. "Celeste is Victor's daughter. She does what Victor says. She always has." He finished his coffee, stood up, and shook my hand. "For what it's worth, I've told Trent it's over. He won't be pursuing Celeste anymore. I'm not having my family attached to Victor's mess." I sat in that coffee shop for a long time after Gerald left, because the picture had finally come into full focus. Victor hadn't just been trying to upgrade his daughter's husband. He'd been trying to merge families to get the Calloway money and connections tied to his projects. Trent wasn't just a replacement for me. He was a business strategy, and it all just collapsed. Final update. And I'll try to keep this as organized as I can, because a lot happened in a short window. After Gerald pulled Trent out of the picture, Victor's plan didn't just fall apart. It vaporized. He'd built this whole scheme on 2 pillars, my financial guarantee and the Calloway family connection. Now, both were crumbling, and Victor responded the way Victor always responds to losing control. He blamed everyone else. Diane called Nora, not me, Nora. She'd apparently gotten the number from Celeste. She told Nora that I was destroying the family, and that if I had any decency, I'd call the bank and fix this. Nora told her that decency was a strange word to use, given that her husband had ambushed me with divorce papers and tried to replace me with a younger model. Diane hung up. Nora sent me the call log with a text that just said, "Handled." Meanwhile, the legal side moved faster than I expected. Patricia filed our counterproposal to the divorce. It was clean but firm. I'd agreed to a fair split of marital assets, meaning the house would be sold and proceeds divided based on actual contributions, including my down payment. No transitional support payments, given that Celeste was employed and the divorce was initiated by her family. The $40,000 personal loan to Victor would be addressed separately, and the Birchfield guarantee would be resolved as a condition of the divorce settlement. Victor's attorney, Leland, pushed back hard. He argued the guarantee was a separate business matter, completely unrelated to the marriage. Patricia responded with 14 months of text messages, emails, and a signed statement from me detailing how Celeste had personally asked me to sign the guarantee as a favor to her father. She argued it was a marital financial decision that had to be unwound as part of the divorce. The judge agreed with Patricia. This meant Victor couldn't finalize his daughter's divorce without dealing with the loan I was guaranteeing. And he couldn't deal with the loan without either finding a replacement guarantor or bringing the project into compliance with the bank's requirements. He couldn't do either. The Birchfield project sat idle for 6 weeks. I drove past it once during that time. Just a skeleton of framing and concrete, wrapped in plastic sheeting that was already starting to tear. A construction sign out front with Victor's company name on it, fading by the sun. Victor finally came to the table through his attorney, not voluntarily. The bank had given him a deadline. Fix the deficiencies or they'd call the loan. Calling the loan would mean Victor owed $1.9 million immediately. And since I was a guarantor, I'd be on the hook if he couldn't pay. Patricia made it crystal clear that if that happened, I'd be suing Victor for every penny, plus damages. So we negotiated. It took 3 weeks of back and forth. But here's where we landed. Victor would refinance the Birchfield loan within 90 days, removing my guarantee entirely. To do this, he had to bring in a new equity partner, a developer from Cleveland named Mathis, who bought a 40% stake in the project at a significant discount. Victor essentially gave away nearly half his legacy project to get out from under the mess he created. The $40,000 personal loan was acknowledged in writing and folded into a repayment schedule. Victor would pay me back over 18 months. With interest, the house was sold. After the mortgage and my documented down payment were accounted for, the split was fair, not generous to me. Fair. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks after that dinner at the steakhouse. Celeste and I sat in the same courtroom, but on opposite sides. She looked tired. Not angry, just tired. When it was over, she walked past me in the hallway. "Harrison," she said. I stopped. "I'm sorry. Not for my dad. For me. I should have been stronger." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." She walked away. That was the last real conversation we've had. Now, where is everyone? You guys always want to know the aftermath. So here it is. Victor got the Birchfield project back on track. But it's not his anymore. Not really. Mathis controls the finances, the contractor relationships, and the timeline. Victor's name is still on the sign, but he answers to someone else now. From what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, it's eating him alive. Diane has stopped mentioning the project at social events entirely, which, for Diane, is the equivalent of a full public breakdown. Trent Calloway moved to Chicago for a new job. Gerald made it happen. I don't think about Trent much, to be honest. He was always more of a prop than a person in this whole situation. Celeste is still working at her nonprofit. She's living in an apartment on the west side. She reached out to me once, about 2 months after the divorce was final. A text that said, "I hope you're doing well." I read it. I didn't respond. I don't have anger towards Celeste, but I also don't have anything left to give her. Nora is doing great. She made me promise to take her to dinner once a week for 6 months as payment for letting me crash at her place. I've kept that promise. She's currently trying to set me up with a woman from her gym. I told her I'm not ready. She told me, "I don't get to decide that." Classic Nora. As for me, my business is actually doing better than ever. It turns out when you stop spending emotional energy managing your in-laws' expectations, you have a lot more bandwidth for actual work. I signed 2 new clients last quarter. I'm looking at a small office space downtown. I've started running in the mornings, which is something I always said I'd do and never did. Am I happy? I don't know if that's the right word yet. I'm clear. For the first time in years, I'm not performing for anyone. I'm not trying to earn someone's approval. I'm not wondering if the person lying next to me wishes I were someone else. I'm just me, and it turns out that's enough. For anyone going through something similar, here's the only advice I'll offer. Pay attention to what people do, not what they say. Victor told me I was family while using my credit to build his dream. Celeste told me she loved me while signing divorce papers behind my back. Diane told me they'd always like me while actively planning my replacement. The truth is always in the actions. Always. One last thing. Remember when I signed those papers at the restaurant and Victor looked relieved, like I was making it easy for him? I was. Just not in the way he thought. So I've told you my story. I'm curious, truly. If you were in my shoes, after that dinner, after everything, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. I'm going to go for a run.